Yes, yes, Surat.
Okay, good morning. So I'm Surat and I'm a senior research associate with the Center for Predictive Human Model Systems at Atal Incubation Center CCMB. And this center was established in collaboration between Atal Incubation Center CCMB and Humane Society International India, primarily to enable research that is based on human relevant information or human relevant biology rather than primarily relying on animal models, which has been predominant method of investigating questions related to human diseases and human biology for in since a long time. So what it's not going. My screen is stuck. Okay. Yeah, so what exactly do I mean by human relevant model system? So while biology has always relied on animal models in the past decade or so, there have been several developments in areas such as microfluidics, microscopy, computational methods, etc., which has led to development of several such technologies such as organoids, organ chips, 3D engineered tissues, ex vivo cultures, and also advanced imaging techniques which now enables us to generate data that is more relevant to human biology because they are based on human stem cells or human cells. So there is a need and globally these technologies are rapidly advancing in various countries such as US, Europe, etc. And there have been several regulatory initiatives also towards pushing towards these technologies. For example, the US Environmental Protection Agency announced few years back that it's going to completely stop mammalian funding by 2035, and there have been several pushes towards usage of these systems because they provide more relevant information, which is in terms of the human biology context. And our center was primarily established to enable these methodologies in India. And how do we do this? So our work is divided into several branches. So first area is of course increasing awareness because the awareness about these methodologies is still currently low in India. So we do that by writing popular articles, reviews, conducting webinars such as these. Another such area where we focus on is conducting education or training programs. So we've also conducted several workshops, and currently we've also received a grant to conduct an EMBO India lecture series, which will be first of its kind in this area in India, and the details of which we'll be announcing soon. We've also involved in several policy initiatives where we write white papers or conduct multi-stakeholder roundtable meetings to increase engagement between various stakeholders. And we're also involved in, again, several global collaborations to understand what are the challenges and how we can take this field ahead in India. And we've also been involved in providing grants and providing funding. For example, recently we provided grants to 2 Indian scientists to develop an adverse outcome pathway in the field of cancer. And the roadmap which we envision to enable the human relevant research in India involves what we would like to achieve is establish certain centers of excellence in India to further validate these methods, enable connections between the technology developers and the end users, which could be pharma or other stakeholders. We would also like to develop engagement models with regulatory bodies because ultimately these methodologies need to receive regulatory approvals. So, and it is of course beneficial if this engagement starts to happen during the initial stages of the technology development process. Um, and enabling cross-border collaboration is also essential because many of these countries as are developing these technologies and the past decade, and enabling collaboration would help in technology transfer and also facilitating more cross-border funding. And another aspect is enabling supply chain because many of the currently for not just for human relevant research, but also biological research in India in general, there are still several supply chain issues, which also increases the cost for conducting these experiments. So that's also something which we would like to enable on a long-term basis. And with this, I would like to end and just a brief mention that we are We also have a quarterly newsletter now, and we'll be posting the registration link for the newsletter in the chat box. And this newsletter basically provides information about what is the latest research, and also informational videos, opinion articles, and job opportunities or grants which are happening in this area, both in India and globally. So I would encourage you to apply to register for this newsletter. So with this, I would stop, and I would like to introduce our today's speaker. So Dr. Radha is currently an emeritus scientist at CSIR CCMB, and she has been working at CCMB for several decades now. And her interest, her lab's interest has been primarily understanding the molecular players that regulate gene expression and cytoskeleton modeling to guide cells to achieve specialized properties and form functional tissues. For the past several years, she has also been in active research in organoid-related research. And today, she'll be talking about how her lab has been investigating the use of organoids to study human development. And we are very happy and privileged to have her speaker in our webinar today. So Dr. Radha, so over to you. Thank you.
I'm sharing the screen.
Also, just a brief note. So usually we have questions towards the end of the webinar, but Dr. Radha has requested that to keep this this time the presentation a bit more interactive. So if you have questions anywhere in between the presentation also, please do raise your hands. And so that or you can type in the chat box whatever questions you may have, and then we'll kind of stop and take those questions as she's going through the presentation. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I purposely chose to target this webinar for the students. So I request the experts in this field, excuse me for not going into too much of details. My intention is more to give you a view of what is happening today in developments that have enabled drastic reduction in the use of animals, and how decades of research in fundamental understanding of the properties of cells have enabled us to do this. So let me begin at the very beginning and talk about what happened in evolution. I don't know how many of you will be aware that the time it took from formation of the earth to formation of the first cells was far less than what it took for unicellular organisms to evolve into multicellular organisms. It took many, many more billions of years. So what enabled multicellularism, and why did it take so long in evolution to form multicellular organisms? It's because there are multiple levels of organization. Multicellular organisms are not really bags of cells. We have a lot of functional differences in various tissues and function sharing. And how is that possible? It is possible because though we begin life as from a single cell and end up with several tissue types, as development happens, there is a lot of patterning. There is a lot of control on size, shape, and order, where our organs are placed in our body. How has this been possible? Primarily possible because of growth factors and cytokines that signal through a series of intermediate molecules that decide the fate of every individual cell in our body. whether it has to divide and go through the cell cycle, whether it has to undergo cell death, and very importantly, what shape it should adapt, which is enabled by cytoskeletal modeling. And many of these are under the control of gene expression. When the cell properties in this regard change, the cell has an option to decide whether it should divide, it should attain specialized functions, what we call differentiation, whether it should just stay in a quiescent state, just waiting for an opportune time to take or decide on its fate, or undergo cell death. And that's how you have embryonic development as well as tissue development and maintenance of tissue homeostasis, adult tissue homeostasis. Okay, now patterning of embryos is specifically dependent on two phenomena, those are determination and differentiation. Determination involves a commitment of a cell to its final fate. And differentiation means the process of its attaining those specialized functions, and it is irreversible, by and large irreversible within the body. So determination can happen and by partitioning of molecules into two parts of the cell, and that when the cell divides, there is a difference in the properties of the two daughter cells. This can be achieved through induction, and the niche in which the cell is present is extremely important. So the extracellular matrix or the niche can be providing signals which decide the fate of a neighboring cell. And that is how during early embryonic divisions, cells adapt different properties, and that enables development of lineage specificity. I'll just give you a couple of examples how we understood that there is a molecular control of how cell fate is determined, both at the cell level and also at the organism level. For example, at the cell level, when a tissue is growing, you can't have all the dividing cells in time formed and then suddenly all of them differentiating. For example, the nervous system or our brain. The neural precursor cells, which have the property of dividing, form along with a subpopulation that starts differentiating. So every adult tissue will always have a small proportion of cells which retain the capacity to generate more precursor cells and call them to use when there is a particular requirement. So there is always, and that can be on the basis, like I said, the properties of a cell can be determined by the niche in which it's present, or the placement of molecules within the cell. If there are two different molecules placed at different poles, now the divided cells attain different properties. Now, I'm sure you would have all been taught about the experiments of Spearman and Mangold, that in the early embryo, there is something called a dorsal organizer. Because if you transplant a dorsal organizer from one embryo into another at an anterior or a different position, opposite to that of its own dorsal organizer, this was done in Newets. What they found was there is patterning happening at both locations, and then there is a secondary organism formed attached to the one that should have normally formed. Okay. And when it comes to importance of signaling, I will just give you the example of a growth factor called Wnt. Is there some question? Is there somebody who would like to ask?
I think maybe someone unmuted by mistake.
Fine.
Yeah, please, if there's any question, please raise your hands or type in the chat box.
Yes, maybe I should remind you that I would prefer this webinar not to be a monologue. Okay, because I just want that if anybody is having any doubts, it's better that they clarify then and there rather than wait, because you lose track if you wait until the end. Okay, so what I was mentioning is signaling is so important that a signaling molecule called Wnt is a determinant of anterior posterior axis. I'm sure ever since we have been conscious, we look at our own bodies and wonder how from a single cell we have developed symmetry or asymmetry, how the axes were developed. For example, the head and the feet, the dorsal and the ventral, the left and the right, isn't it? So it is a molecule called Wnt that determines which is anterior. So if you have Wnt, then only the anterior posterior axis develops. So what happened in planarians, they did an experiment using an animal which Wnt signaling responder, that is called beta-catenin, has been removed. What happens? There's no posterior end to the embryo, and the animal develops two heads. So this emphasizes, this is the barest of examples, this emphasizes the importance of signaling in cell fate and tissue fate determination. Okay, so typically you will have signaling coming from growth factors, the extracellular matrix, and these are sensed by receptors, which through a large number of signaling intermediates alter gene expression, and similarly also alter the cytoskeleton, the actin dynamics or the tubulin dynamics in a cell, which allows the cells to achieve specialized properties and decide what it has to do next. So a large number of labs across many cell biologists and developmental biologists, including our own lab, we have tried to understand this regulation, because understanding this regulation and how normal cells are controlled or the properties are controlled is totally important for us to understand what goes wrong when there's disease. And that's why we have focused on identifying signaling components and then also asking the questions of how they function, when they function, where they function in the cell, for what do they function. Okay, by and large, we have been able to carry out these experiments using human cells in culture. During the emphasis on signaling, I'm reiterating, because starting from the single cell stage, you have a lot of signaling molecules or determinants which temporally and spatially get activated to form the early embryo and undergo gastrulation. So important pathways which I have just depicted here are the ones belonging to Wnt, Notch, the BMP signaling, the AKT, PI3 kinase AKT pathway, MAP kinase pathway, and the JAK-STAT signal. You'll see that there is a temporal regulation of these pathways as the embryo divides. Now, for developmental biologists, there has been a major problem in trying to understand what determines this regulation in a spatial and temporal fashion, and is there a master regulator that starts very early on in the very early embryo, 1 cell stage, 2 cell stage, 4 cell stage, that actually enables patterning of the embryo. So what should be the properties of such an important master regulator? It should be able to regulate gene expression, it should be able to regulate proliferation and migration, survival, cytoskeletal dynamics. And the test of its importance is that if you remove this molecule, the embryos do not survive. So a master regulator is usually what happens is very important molecules, nature has made that there is always a standby. But in some cases, a standby does not suffice. If there is a master regulator, nature has ensured that either it is there and serves its function properly, or if it is not there, the defects are such that there is very, very early embryonic lethality. So we actually chose to identify such a determinant, and over the last couple of decades or so, we have been able to do so. And the systems we have used are human cells in culture, embryonic stem cells, zebrafish model, etc. And we have by and large tried to avoid the use of small, or even for that matter, big mammals. So this is a simplified depiction of some of the properties we have identified for a signaling molecule called C3G. Don't worry about its name, but take my word that it is a multitasking signaling molecule, which if it is knocked down, mice die at very, very early embryonic stages around gastrulation time or around peri-implantation time. And the reason for that is through a variety of studies, we have been able to show that it regulates gene expression, cytoskeletal modeling, and alternate splicing, chromatin dynamics, and a variety of other functions. And it is important for differentiation of cells into specific lineages, whether it's a neuronal cell or a muscle cell. Okay. So taking this forward, we particularly wanted to know why is it so important for early embryonic development? Does it regulate pathways that are absolutely essential for the early cells to start dividing and attain fate? And two of these molecules that are extremely important, we know from others studies, are beta-catenin, like I mentioned. See, if you don't have beta-catenin, a planarium has a head at both ends of its body. It doesn't have a tail. Okay. Similarly, a kinase called GSK3 beta is absolutely essential for cell division. And if it is active, the cell does not differentiate. Okay. So unless GSK3 beta is inactivated, the proliferating cells do not stop dividing and achieve specialized functions, whether it is the skeletal muscle tubes or whether it is the mature neurons. So we found that actually C3G is able to control the functions of beta-catenin as well as GSK3 beta. So I will emphasize that cells in culture can teach us a lot if we observe and listen to them. And that's what we have done. And not only us, many, many labs across the world have focused on understanding signaling components that decide cell fate. Now, when you talk about signaling, your probably textbook image is that there are receptors on top of the cell membrane which receive these signals. But more recent findings, what we have understood in the last couple of decades, and what is probably earlier seen by some researchers but ignored by and large, is a cellular organelle that is absolutely important for any kind of signaling that takes place in all the cells of our body. And that is the centrosome. So centrosome, all of you are familiar with, but this organelle is actually something that has two faces, has dual functions, and which are opposite in nature. For example, In dividing cells, you know the function of a centrosome. See, this is the centrosome, which actually you will have it at the poles, and the classical function that is described is that it enables partitioning of the chromosomes into the two daughter cells. But when a cell does not want to divide, this centrosome actually parks to the cell membrane and puts out an antenna-like structure called a primary cilium. And this is by and large present in all cells of a body. And they can be, and generally most cells have a single primary cilium like this. But for example, but then you can always also have cells of epithelial structures where there is a requirement for fluid flow, where you have more cilia, which beat in unison to allow fluid flow across the tubes or the ducts. Okay, now what is this primary cilium? It's a very small structure, about 5 to 10 nanometers, and less than 5 to 10 micrometers, and less than a micrometer in width. So it just pops out of the cell, and primarily it is responsible for all kinds of signaling, whether it is chemo, mechano, photo, thermo sensation. So the fact that you are able to see my slides is because the primary cilia in the rod cells of your retina are functional. If they weren't functional, you wouldn't have been able to see these slides. If somebody brought a samosa into the room that you are sitting in, you would sense it only if you had functional primary cilia in your nasal epithelial cells. So these are like all important for reception of signals of a variety. And signal means generally you perceive that it's only a chemical signal. No, not necessarily so. Mechanical signals, photo signals, thermo signals, they're all equally important. And though these were actually detected long ago, they were thought to be vestigial because we couldn't identify a function for them. But in the last couple of decades, it was found that molecules that make this cilium actually are defective in individuals with syndromes. And there's a whole variety of syndromes that are caused because of defects in the primary cilium, either in the structure of the primary cilium or also in the function of the primary cilium. And surprisingly, you will find that people with these syndromes have multiple organ defects, which is seen in many tissues. And I will just show you some of these examples, but one wasn't sure, why is it that so many tissues are being affected? The implication of this was that primary cilia are very important determinants of development, not only in the early embryo, but also when tissues are being formed. So you see the kind of defects that you have, something called the molar tooth sign in Joubert syndrome. So look, if there is abnormal facial features, polydactyly is very common. Then you know that internal organs in our body are by and large asymmetrically placed. All of you are aware of that. But there are some individuals where the heart is slightly placed to the right, and the lung, the right and the left lung are inverted. Sometimes it is that the liver, which is generally on the right side of your abdominal cavity or just below the diaphragm, is placed on the opposite side. This is called heterotaxy, and this is a common feature of defective cilia. Defective cilia, you can take it that means defective signaling of that cell. Okay. So you have a whole lot of issues which are development related, like congenital heart defects, facial anomalies, hearing loss, retinal malfunction, skeletal abnormalities like proper formation of teeth is not there, other skeletal abnormalities, the palate is not properly formed, various. So I'll just give you a little more in-depth into some of these. I was mentioning this condition called heterotaxy or laterality. Okay, so something that has to be placed like this is now placed in the opposite direction. You'll see that inversus totalis means both the thoracic and the abdominal cavity, the internal organs are just placed in a reverse. Now, why should this be happening? Something that is very unique to during mammalian development is what is called the embryonic node. This is formed just before gastrulation, and the purpose of this node is that it has the cells in this node have cilia, primary cilia, which beat in a particular direction. Okay, and when fluid flows in that direction, that is when the left-right axis of the early embryo is set. Now, if you don't have primary cilia, then you have 50% of the embryo, there's no particular left-right. So you know that all of us have a particular left-right axis. It's not that, you know, it is a 50-50% chance. But if you don't have primary cilia, that's what will happen. Okay. So I'm just trying to emphasize the importance. Now, all of you would have seen individuals with more than 5 fingers, whether it's in the hands or in the feet. Have you wondered, why do these individuals develop an extra finger? Why do they develop fused fingers? Again, it's all about signaling. The emphasis on signaling is so stark, because if you just put your 2 palms together, you will be able to appreciate the beauty of the symmetry of your hands. But then again, there is a specific structure to the way your fingers are formed, which is by and large uniform in all humans. Have you wondered what must be regulating this? It is signaling from a factor called sonic hedgehog. So the sonic hedgehog in a developing limb bud actually forms a gradient. Okay, and the highest amount of sonic hedgehog presence forms the little finger, and when there is no sonic hedgehog, it forms the thumb. So this is the gradient that enables formation of our fingers. Now, if you don't have the actual transcription factor that is regulated by sonic hedgehog signaling, this is the primary cilium. Okay, and primary cilium importantly regulates sonic hedgehog signaling. Okay, now if you don't have the transcription factor which is regulated by sonic hedgehog, you will see what happens, because there is no patterning, there's no gradient which tells when the number of fingers or number of digits has to be set at 5. Okay, so this is another example. I will go to other examples very briefly, and one of them is the development of the cortex of our brain. You know that the cortex in the brain is formed by about 6 layers, and as the neurons develop, there is a particular axis in which they grow, and that is regulated by the primary cilium in these neural precursor cells and in the neurons. So now if you have no primary cilium, because there is a defect in autophagy molecules, you will have the neurons developing in a haphazard fashion and no proper layers of the cortex being developed. And that, you know, the consequence of what will happen: serious mental retardation and developmental defects. You won't even know whether these individuals will survive. Now, I will just briefly come to what we have been doing in the lab with respect to understanding developmental processes. So I told you that we were looking at the importance of C3G in tissue differentiation. So I was wondering, if it is so important, is it regulating signaling at the primary cilium? lo and behold, when we actually looked at it, which required very, very precise and intent experiments to find the little dot, the red dot is what the C3G is. Where is it? It is at the base of the primary cilium. That structure is called the basal body. You know, the the centrosome is formed by two centrioles. One is the mother, which is inherited from the grandmother, and one is a centriole that comes from the mother cell. Okay, so you will find that C3G is particularly present only in one of the centrioles, and we generally use markers. These are all experiments done using cells in culture. Now, we were curious to know what is the role of C3G in deciding the functions of the primary cilia. We found that if we remove C3G, you had abnormally long primary cilia. Abnormally long primary cilia means they're not going to function properly. Okay, and the other thing we found was that if C3G is not there, the centrioles, which are present as only two in each cell, the cell started having multiple centrioles. The implication of that is that now that cell will divide in a multipolar fashion rather than in a bipolar fashion. The consequence of not having a bipolar division could be death, or it could be cancer. So this allowed us a whole series, lots of experiments were done for us to conclude that actually C3G, by locating at the basal body and regulating the primary cilia, appears to be a master regulator of cell fate. So does that mean that if C3G is defective, you will have syndromic condition called ciliopathy? Possible. We'll come to that later. Now, we also wanted to understand what happens, or what is the role of this master regulator at the embryonic stages. So we actually used CRISPR to knock down C3G in embryonic stem cells. And what do we find? We find that these cells continuously self-renew. All of you are aware that embryonic stem cells have a potential to renew themselves, as well as under appropriate conditions differentiate into the germline lineages. But when we removed C3G, they were continuously self-renewing, but despite the presence of differentiation stimuli, they would not go into any of the germ cell lineages. Okay, and these other experiments were done to show these in vivo. Then we also did RNA-seq to look at the transcriptome, what are the kinds of pathways being disrupted. Okay, and the crux or the important findings were that C3G is essential for embryonic germline differentiation. And this made us understand why mice die at early embryonic stages if there is no C3G. So these findings also have a lot of potential in stem cell applications. Okay. Now, this is something that by and large development, early tissue development, early embryo development, by and large we have depended on animals, and also depended on early mammalian, early human embryos, because lots of questions have been left unanswered because of the inability to have an access to material to understand human development. Because questions like, what controls embryo orientation, what controls symmetry, what regulates tissue size and shape. So these have all been left, and the studies on animals have not necessarily been, though we sacrifice a lot of animals. For example, you need at least 100 genetically modified mice to understand what one gene of interest is actually doing, and many more if you want to extend those studies further. So, and at the same time, you never really got human relevant answers. And all of you are aware of the thalidomide example, where when it was tested in animals, people started using it as a drug for morning sickness. And we know the consequence of that. This drug, though it didn't do anything in animals, in humans, it caused severe developmental abnormalities. Most of you would have seen pictures. This is like, a few decades ago. So now focus turned to, can we avoid the use of small mammals? Yes. How? Understanding signals and how cells build tissues through many years of deciphering mechanisms and developing tools has now enabled us to make tissue-specific organoids, human organoids. This I will not touch upon too much because many speakers in this webinar series have touched upon the embryoids and their biomedical applications. But primarily, it is now possible to form organoids of various tissue types and which have been used for understanding more of our developmental process, human developmental process, and also for a large number of biomedical applications. So this has overcome our limitations of understanding human development and morphogenesis of organ systems. And the beauty is that you can follow it dynamically over a period of time as you have this little organ grow in culture. Okay, so the primary question that comes up is, how does an early cell know which type of cells it has to become specialized? So that is a question that has helped us to answer by using organoids. And it has also helped us to understand early patterning. For example, how do cells achieve specialized functions when they're all exposed to the same kind of growth factors? It could be, adhesion factors that determine how cells have a particular axis. There will be a basal and a upper and a lower axis. Then you can also have cell sorting that is absolutely essential in embryos. So based on the junctional molecules, if the cells have tight junctions, they tend to come into the center, and the ones that have looser junctions or less tight junctions tend to form a ring in the outside. So these, as organoids developed, and similarly we have understood how lumens are formed, all either with it's a kidney or the intestine or the heart. And also we have understood the importance of the extracellular matrix. How, if you have a soft matrix versus a stiff matrix, it determines whether the cells become induced to a mesoderm or into some other lineage. A soft matrix actually permits mesodermal induction. Similarly, there are other refinements or findings that we have been able to understand by following organoid growth, and we depend primarily on markers and which are usually transcription factors and the surface expressed molecules. But maturation of the organoid is still a challenge. The organoids, as exemplified by the brain organoids that you see here, actually resemble still the fetal stages of our brain development. We are yet to achieve the complexity of a newborn child's brain or an adult's brain. One thing is there are size limitations and the challenges, though we have been able to achieve action potential in brain organoids. And there are different kinds. You can have just aggregation based unguided differentiation. Now you can also differentiate them into different linear subtypes of the brain and then fuse them to form something that looks or has better complexity and better organization of the brain. So these have helped us understand various aspects of human development and also comparative studies of how the human brain is different from that of other primates or the mouse brain. Okay, for example, people have taken the Neanderthal, understanding the Neanderthal genome, they have seen what is different between the Neanderthal brain and the gene expression in the Neanderthal brain and the human brain, and shown that you can actually make the mutation in the present day genes, which are similar to what was there in the Neanderthal, and understand what was different and how the brains of present day humans have evolved from a Neanderthal-like stage. So, and in addition, we have also been understanding how, disorders of socialization, for example, like autism or Williams syndrome, where the brain, the neurons in the brain suffer from abnormal connectivities. In autism, there is less connectivity. In Williams syndrome, there is a hyperconnectivity. So there is, that is related to socialization. So these are the kind of answers we have obtained from studying the brain development. Similarly, the gut. Now we have the capacity, understanding what molecules will give rise to which part of the gut. Today, we can make the esophagus or the small intestine or the stomach, and also understand how what controls at the molecular level the cells being able to determine into which kind of lineage they have to go into. And molecules like YAP, I'm particularly avoiding mentioning molecules because it won't take you anywhere. I'm sure those of you who are interested can always read and then try and understand depending on your interest. So, and I just gave a few examples. There are many, many more examples of organoids like liver, kidney, the heart. And today we are also able to model the immune system by making tonsil organoids and thymic organoids. And also importantly, we have been able to model the placenta. Human placenta cannot be understood by studying placenta of non-human primates. There are serious differences because the contribution of the extra embryonic tissue seems to be very important. That is something that we are now being able to understand by making trophoblast and deciduous organoids. Now, what are the challenges? Still, these are having limitations of size and complexity, and they lack, by and large, a vascular supply, innervation, and also immune cell interaction, which is absolutely essential for them to mimic the organ systems in vivo. And this is what we are all working towards in the present scenario, because more and more understanding is coming in about the genes that are expressed. Now you can actually modulate, you can mix endothelial cells and make a co-culture which allows innervation, which allows vascularization of the organoids. And then they are able to grow to a slightly larger size and adapt a more complex phenotype. Now, how do we study? I'll just switch over here. How do we study early human development? We have depended on aborted fetuses, the Carnegie samples, and also the samples that come from in vitro fertilization. But there are limitations because in vitro fertilization, you cannot keep the embryos beyond 14 days because this is a time when it is suspected that the embryo is really like forming into an independent individual. So there has been a black box of the gastrulation stage where this is where the actually linear specific differentiation takes place. Okay. And also this is where the axes are formed, whether it's anterior, posterior, left, right, or the dorsoventral axes. But we haven't a handle on understanding how this happens. How does the embryonic node form? Okay. So this has been overcome now by our ability to form gastrolytes. These are groups of embryonic stem cells that can self-assemble into structures which mimic the gastrulation stage of a normal human embryo. You will see the beauty of the axis formation and the symmetry. These colors depict the gene expression, which is almost like what you see in the normal human embryo. So the normal human embryo of the 3rd and 4th week, where gastrulation actually begins, has been by and large not accessible to us. Today, the gastruloids have helped us understand and also brought in novel insights into how the anterior posterior axis formed, and that it is actually independent. So these gastruloids, they don't have a primitive streak, but still they form the anterior posterior axis, which we thought was totally dependent on the primitive streak. Okay. Similarly, the left-right assembly is established even without extraembryonic tissues, even in the in vitro conditions, which tells us the extraembryonic tissues are not so essential for some of these symmetries to form. Okay, there are other findings which I won't go into, but I will just briefly touch upon what we have been trying to do to understand the molecules important for brain development in mammals and how neural precursor cells become mature neurons. And though some molecules are present in all tissues, why is it that they play a role differentially in different tissue types where the functions are different? Okay, so we looked at C3G actually because it seems to be a master regulator. And what we found was in brain tissues, an alternate isoform, which is longer, was being expressed. What is present in testis or in other cell types was not there in the brain. This is particularly expressed in neural precursor cells. And these are marker studies which helped us to understand that. But that was done in the mouse because we could follow the brain through embryonic stages. We could see that embryonic stages, you have two forms of the molecule. There is a normal one, which is present in all tissues, plus an additional one, which now becomes the predominant form as the brain develops. And just at post-birth, you see, and in the adult animals, you see only the upper form. Now we wanted to see, does this happen in the human brain also? For that, we actually made brain organoids and then studied these structures, and lo and behold, we find during organoid development, they start at the early stages with the presence of both isoforms. And as the organoid matures, we followed up to 90 days, and we find that only the upper form is more predominant, okay, which told us that we now have a handle on C3G being expressed as alternate isoforms to enable tissue-specific differentiation. So I mentioned earlier and queried that if you have mutations, because C3G regulates the primary cilium, if you have mutated C3G, could it form syndromic ciliopathy? Yes, indeed. I had thought that C3G's total absence, of course, you will not see because the early human embryos must be dying. So no amount of aborted fetuses exploration have found much where you have defective C3G. But recently, single residue mutations were found in children with birth defects where they had developmental problems, and all of them died post birth very early, maybe a year. I think one of the child. So this was from a genomic group in Switzerland, and they have asked us to understand what are the defects caused by these mutations. Okay, so that's what we have now. We are exploring how these mutations alter knowledge development. Are some tissues particularly more? So if the C3G molecule is totally defective, you will not have the embryo growing. But if you have minor single residue changes, it still affects development, but probably the embryo grows. Okay, so what we have planned to do is we are using now embryonic stem cells or brain organoids, human organoids, and the zebrafish models to carry out work in understanding these mutations. This is a sample of what we are doing in the zebrafish. C3G is expressed, and to our satisfaction, we find that even the zebrafish brain C3G is showing an alternate isoform. So we knocked out C3G in zebrafish, and we find that the survival is compromised, and you'll see the kind of developmental defects that are seen, which is probably akin to what you see in the mammalian system and what we predicted. So coming to the end, I will just tell you that we have actually gone through several decades of understanding signaling events. Basically, when I say signaling events, molecules that regulate the properties and fate of a cell. And this knowledge has enabled us to generate iPSCs and differentiate stem cells into organoids and gastroloids. Gastroloids are just about a couple of years old. In humans, it's just last year that human gastroloids have been developed. And I think the future, the field is open, and the coming decade will see much, much more advances. And in addition, we can use small vertebrates to understand development not only of the embryo, but development of adult tissues and maintaining their homeostasis. I have particularly avoided, now where does this take us? There are lots of biomedical applications we can put these model systems to, which I have not touched upon today. Okay. So coming to an end, basically, years of efforts in understanding signaling have enabled us to make model organ systems in vitro, and these have aided in understanding development and adult tissue differentiation and maintenance. Of course, there are a lot of challenges because primarily of reproducibility, benchmarking, and then developing them with more maturity and higher complexity. Then what about size? The organoid is just about a few millimeters, whereas the actual brain is several centimeters in diameter. So that is something. And then also we need to develop methods to not use animal-derived products like Matrigel, for example. Okay, so that is probably something that several people are looking at. And now what controls organ position, shape? The field is really open. Every answer that we have been getting has been generating so many more questions, and not the least to think about ethical issues. Now, if you can grow a small gastroloid, how long can you grow it? Does it get does it start developing a minute brain? Will it feel pain? These are issues and I think that is beyond the discussion of this webinar. And so what's ahead? Actually, we have now primarily worked on 1, 2, 10 molecules, and which is being, your basket has become bigger with the genomics, transcriptomics studies, but still fundamental gaps remain between identification of individual molecules and our understanding of how these molecules function collectively. So the goal is set, and understanding cell-fate determinants is the only way we can understand how defective molecules cause disease, and also hope that we can therapeutically intervene. Okay, and I will end by acknowledging all the staff and students who did this work, the personnel of the tissue culture facility, some of my collaborators, funding agencies, and also the scientists whose work I have mentioned from across the world. And I particularly thank the CPHMS for giving me this opportunity, and all of you as participants, you have joined in. And I would be happy to take questions. Thank you, one and all.
Thanks, Dr. Radha, for the wonderful talk. So we have few questions, so we'll just take them now.
Yeah.
So Tikshana is asking, so good afternoon, ma'am. So is the development of extra finger due to no hedgehog, and what is the reason for the less number of fingers on limb?
Yes, it's the same. It is defective signaling. It need not be just hedgehog. You can have no hedgehog causing a similar defect to no primary cilium also. See, if you don't have the primary cilium, what is going to perceive the hedgehog signal? Okay. And because this gradient is not established, you will have more fingers. Now, if you have higher hedgehog signaling, it is possible that you can have fused fingers and less fingers. But more common is having more fingers. I think even in nature, you would have come across more commonly individuals with more fingers rather than less fingers. I think nature has set it up beautifully. There is a default. So it ensures that an extra finger is still better than not having one of the fingers. So that's the beauty of nature.
Right. So this next question is by Tripti Mai, who is asking how does few cells manage to maintain their stemness in spite of being in the same environmental cues to differentiate into a particular lineage in an organ?
Yes, that is the beauty of stem cells. So because of the properties, the kinds of genes that are expressed there, genes called pluripotent factors, they have the ability to both self-renew and also differentiate. Now, if you take a population of stem cells, this population generally self-renews by and large, but the population that is in the peripheries, that is adherent to your substratum, they start differentiating. So that means the exposure of some of these cells to a different environmental situation must be, it's not a foolproof system because a stem cell has both capabilities. So it's when you tweak one or two molecules like the C3G. Now, if you tweak C3G or remove C3G for that matter, these stem cells are so robust in self-renewal that you will never see a single differentiated cell. Okay, so that is how the programs of stem cells are set. And this happens just because of a handful of master regulators. And it looks like C3G is even controlling many of these master regulators, which are called pluripotent factors, differentiating factors. Okay, it also tells us that C3G is not required for self-renewal. It may be playing a role actually to suppress self-renewal and enable differentiation.
So next question.
Do I answer her? Do I?
Tripti Mai, are you there?
Yeah.
Are you there? You can also choose to unmute, and if there are any subsequent questions or if your question is answered.
Yeah, it's okay. You move to the next question.
Okay, okay. Yeah, okay. So next
she can come up later. Yeah, she can come
Yes,
up.
yes, sure.
I think we can spend about 5 minutes or 10 minutes answering questions.
Right. So if there are any follow-ups, you can choose to type it here or you can raise your hand. Yeah. So next question is the delay in the development of organoids might be from signaling from other organs which might be interlinked?
Yes, very right. Not only signaling from other organs, but more importantly from endothelial cells. See, all our tissues are vascularized. So, you know, the tissue system that develops first during embryonic development is our vascular system. The heart starts beating around 4 weeks of human development. And it is this that enables supply of nutrients and oxygen, which is absolutely essential that all parts of the embryo are growing. So what you said is very right. And that's what people are trying to now. We are trying to make co-cultures of endothelial cells with the organoids of interest so that there is a vasculature developed.
Right.
Next one. Yeah.
So Tripti Mai has said that she's here and thanks for answering the questions. I think, I think those are the main questions.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? With someone, you can choose to unmute also. If there are any other questions? Okay. Yeah, so Tikshana has also said thank you, ma'am. Okay. So Soumya is asking, thank you for the great talk. Can NPCs be activated to generate new neurons to overcome the loss of neurons of specific region of brain in the neurodegenerative disorders?
Yes, this is what we know now. At one time, we used to think that all the neurons you are born with, you die with. We didn't actually know that the central nervous system or the brain has actually stem cells or precursor cells. So those were very difficult to detect. Only when we have understood what the properties of these are, we were able to detect them. So we needed to understand the signature. What are the surface express molecules? What are the transcription factors there? So for example, when I said the CTG is present in neural precursor cells, I showed that by using a neural precursor marker called DCX. So that is because we have a handle. Today we know that yes, neural precursor cells or stem cells do exist in the adult nervous system, and probably it is possible to tweak them in the case of injury or neurodegenerative diseases. I think some kind of correction probably happens without our intervention. Okay, we really don't know how to intervene, how to choose or how to trigger these stem cells. That is awaiting further understanding of or getting to tools that will enable such a.
Triptimai is asking, so ma'am, is it possible to differentiate somatic cells into a particular lineage by overexpressing C3G and providing environmental cues?
Yes, yes. Actually, for example, one of the kind of experiments we did was, that cancer cells are having properties of stem cells, isn't it? So we took highly invasive breast cancer cells, and we just wanted to see if we alter the levels of C3G in these cells, what will happen. Okay. So when we put in extra C3G into these cells, lo and behold, they lost the ability to migrate, but there were such dramatic changes in the cytoskeleton. Now, if you looked at that cell, it would look like a neuron. It had the branches, the dendritic structures, the nodes. Of course, we didn't do the electrophysiology, but all the markers indicated that these cells now have the properties of mature neurons. Yes, that is called transdifferentiation. And it is possible by tweaking not only the expression of molecules inside the cell, but sometimes also by providing exogenous growth factors or cytokines or the matrix, which is very important. Matrix is a substratum, the strength of the substratum, whether it's a hard surface, soft surface, everything determines what the fate of that particular cell is going to be as our bodies are developing. Only today we are learning to mimic these systems. The last 50, it is now about close to 70 years since we got the ability to grow human cells in culture, HeLa cells, that was in 1953. But those were all flat cells growing in a flat layer in two-dimensional form. Only in the last 10 years, we have developed the ability to actually grow them well in 3 dimensions. And that has come from our understanding of extracellular matrices. So 50 years or 50 years, we actually did only flat biology, but they were nevertheless extremely useful for a lot of studies for us to understand the properties of cells.
Soumya is asking, does these trans-differentiated cells from fibroblast into neurons mimic the age of the person taken from?
Not necessarily, but it is known that the age of the person from which you have sourced the cells does affect the ability to transdifferentiate. Okay, but you might not be today, you might not be able to predict what is the age of the person. What we know is that always cells from a younger individual, for that matter, newborn cells from a newborn individual are better having the capacity to differentiate or differentiate for that matter than individuals from a higher age. So what we do for human fibroblasts to study diseases is that you can take fibroblasts from an adult with a disease, convert them into pluripotent stem cells called induced pluripotent stem cells. You just need to introduce 4 factors which are called the Yamanaka factors. They now become pluripotent stem cells. Now these pluripotent stem cells can be made into different category of tissues in vitro, but they will not reflect the age of the person, because today the organoids we are making are all of the nature that simulates the tissue as an embryo, where it was as an embryo. You don't have today, suppose there is cystic fibrosis in the individual, you can collect and mimic cystic fibrosis by making gut organoids, but this gut is not like the gut in the adult. It is more like the gut in the fetus of that individual.
Maybe I
No, Dr. Radha?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm
Someone
done.
was
Yeah, I
muted.
think, I hope I have answered her question.
Yes. Soumya, I hope the question is answered. If you're around.
Only one thing might provide a clue to the age, and that is the epigenetic modifications, but we don't have a handle yet on actually pinpointing the age.
Right. If there are no further questions, Mr. Satyamurthy, you're unmuted. Do you want to ask a question? Hello? Okay, I'm not hearing back from him. So both Triptimai and Mr. Vikas, they have both commented that it was an excellent talk and everything was clearly explained. So if there are no further questions, I would like to thank Dr. Radha for the wonderful talk and also excellent interaction after the talk. And thank you everyone for joining in and patiently waiting for almost an hour and a half. So thanks, and because it's a monthly series, we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. And thanks everyone, and thank you, Dr. Radha, again for taking out your time and providing your insights for this.
Welcome. I would like to say that if anybody has further questions or doubts, as a follow-up, they are welcome to actually write to me and clarify.
Sure.
Because especially I'm thinking of the students, and I hope I've been able to pass on some bit of my excitement in understanding fundamental processes, which is possible, as a researcher in cell biology, because large number of questions related to life process are still open to address.
Right. So if you don't mind, I'm just typing out your email in the chat box. It's vradha@ccmb.res.in.
Sure.
And if anyone wants to get back to her for any follow-up questions or any clarifications, please, you can write to her. So I've typed out her mail in the chat box, which for everyone. And so thank you. So multiple people are saying, Dr. Deepak, Soumya, and Mr. Mahesh, they're all saying that it was a very informative talk. So thank you, Dr. Radha. So we'll hopefully we'll meet the participants in the next webinar, and thanks everyone for joining in.
Yeah. Thank you one and all the best to the students. I will leave Surat.
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you,
ma'am.
Sham, for
Yeah,
everything. Mhm.
sure.